recording as well.
Sounds good.
I'm just recording my own mic.
Oh, okay. Well, good. It should overlay over this one, and I might not even have to mask you because you will sync up perfectly with you.
Yeah,
You know what I'm
hopefully.
saying?
Yeah.
Okay. But your sound quality is pretty good, so.
Okay, well, this is just my cell phone laying on my desk right in front of me.
All right. Well, I have been. I don't know. I got into a discussion on the Quillette Circle, and I was kind of rambling, networky topic.
Yeah.
Uh, I don't know.
So what you're saying is you spoiled this whole discussion.
Well, no, I didn't actually. I was trying to work not work wrinkles out. I was trying to get my head wrapped around a couple of the sharp corners on the edges. And
Yeah.
there's still a bunch of it I don't have my head worked around in regards to some of the finer points of a network's ability to solve a problem.
Right. All
Well,
right,
well,
so
like,
why don't you introduce the topic then?
oh, okay. Uh, we are wanting to talk through network and how a network functions and the way human civilization functions as a network or as the human central nervous system functions as a network because it is. Um, and networks are represented, we see them represented everywhere. We see them colonies of mold, beehives, ant hives, uh, any group that is comprised of individual nodes which can detect or listen, observe anyway, um, make a decision based on what they observe, and then pass information along to another node or group of nodes. And that's a network. And the problem solving abilities of it, as opposed to um, an either or switch, you know, is there's so much parallel processing that goes on that problems some problems can be solved before they're even identified, uh, or before they're
Before they exist.
right before they exist. Obviously,
No, but I mean, you know what I mean, before they've actually really
you're
manifested themselves
right,
as a problem.
right,
You can
right,
have nodes that recognize dysfunction or potential dysfunction before it actually becomes a problem.
right, right. That's certainly before it's come to its full, you know, before it's become a full bear.
Well, that's the goal, right?
Right, right. Well, and that's the selling point. That's the benefit of a network. That's why our central nervous systems function as well as they do. They solve problems really well. You know that serve the network itself, that serve the central nervous system itself, or the society, or the culture, or the whatever. So,
Um,
oh, go ahead.
Interestingly, though, like, so you're coming from the pure network side, and every time I hear this and nodes, and you know this, we've talked about this on text and in person or in the phone,
Right,
um, is I immediately think about sensors because I come from the sensor world. Do radar and sonar and network communication, and I immediately think of good sensors versus bad sensors and noise versus signal and how difficult that makes networks.
it it, it does. And that's a problem, but it's a problem that the network itself can compensate for as long as it can observe. So a given node or a given cluster of nodes that don't have accurate or have incorrect sensing ability, if it's if those sensors are not identifying a problem, um, that is going to become manifest for the system as a whole. That problem will also exhibit um, other things that the network itself will pick up. That other nodes, or even those same nodes, depending, might be able to pick up. And so the problem can still be identified. Now, in a restricted, designed thing, um, I understand what you're talking about. Or I think I do. You're talking about, I'm building a machine. I need it to know about this thing. I need it to be able to observe this thing. And so I'm going to put this sort of sensor in there, and it's going to be able to see this thing, and I'm going to be able to, build the network so that it can identify this equals a problem. Here's what you do to avoid that problem, or to circumvent the problem, or to solve the problem.
Sort of. But I'm actually thinking, so, let's look in the case of a radar that's rotating. I have to have sensors that tell me where it's pointing. And if those sensors don't tell me reliably where it's pointing, then I start having to make guesses as to where it's pointing, or else I can be consistently wrong depending on how those sensors fail me. And in a relatively simple system like that, you can look at old data and you can look at current data and you can say, whoa, something went wrong. This isn't right. Because maybe oh, hey, I know there's a particular reflection that I always get that's always at this location because it's a lighthouse or a mountain or a big rock or whatever, a boat at anchor that never moves. And hey, it's moved. It shouldn't have moved. So therefore I know it's wrong. But I've looked now at another set of data. This is more, abstract that the return of the main sensor itself. But to me, a sensor is any part of the network that provides feedback. So it's an ant dropping a pheromone signal. It's a person saying, yelling fire. It's a little reed switch flipping over because it's a magnet has passed by it. It's any one of these things. It's a
sensory neuron. Yeah.
Yeah, effectively. And, simple networks, even a radar is a network of sensors put together to produce a value. And then we use that sensor data itself and process it further to do more with it. But even the simple machine is a set of sensors. We had, one where it figured out how fast it was rotating by the EM feedback from the motor. Okay. It was backfeeding EM, and we were counting the pulses of the backfed EM off the motor, and that's how we figured out how many cycles of the actual motor itself had spun, which we could then mathematically calculate.
Okay, so you're still talking about using, instead of having an encoder on the motor shaft to actually measure, you're still using like collateral data to identify. Yeah, okay, I'm with you. I got you.
And that actually caused us a huge problem when we upped the power in the system and did a few things, and changed what was inside the casing, and all of a sudden we were getting reflections of that signal all over the place, and it was causing us to miscount where we were. We had no clue where the radar was pointing, and it was noisy, it was bad, and we couldn't figure out why. But we knew it was bad. We could look at it and say that's not right. But first they blamed my software, because they always do. And then I was able to prove that it wasn't the software, and then we went and ran some tests, and it worked. It worked in the lab, so we said, well, it's probably because the dummy load stops this from happening. And then we took it out in the field, and sure enough, when you're actually transmitting, it does something different. And so, but basically what I'm saying is anything that feeds data into the network is a sensor. And my angle is always looking at, how do you tell which sensors are giving you good data reliably? And it's super important to the value of a sensor. And I think our brains do that automatically, right? Our brains, weight and de-weight neurons based on whether they're giving valuable good signal and they're not.
Right. Well, and even those adjacent neurons are having to use an educated guess,
I mean, you look at the cases where people get those prism glasses on, and after half an hour or so, their brain readjusts and can compensate for that prism
effect.
because it figures out over time. It figures out from feedback. Hey, I threw the ball to where I thought that person was, and the ball went to the right of the person
Right.
quite a bit, and it's doing that all the time. So something's wrong. And so we have, there's a sensor there that says the ball is not visually, the ball is not going where it's supposed to go, but I think I'm aiming to the right place. So
Right.
anyway, so
Yeah.
yeah, so you're very interested in the nodes themselves
Well,
and the network idea itself, and I'm very interested in the sensor idea, and I think that's fine.
well, and I
The
think
good sensor, bad sensor.
I think they track. I mean, we're I'm pretty sure we're using a slightly different vocabulary to describe the same problem. Uh, and when you're talking the fine details, uh, the sensor, the mapping of the sensor idea over the problem is probably going to be very useful. Certainly more useful than saying, well, this dozen nodes is ignoring this dozen nodes, and or this 700 nodes aren't.
Right.
When it gets down to the nut cutting. Pardon my Apache.
Uh, and you probably actually mean that. That's probably actually Apache.
Well, no, it's probably Seminole.
Okay. People who don't know, he's lived in Indian country,
Yeah,
and
grew up in the territory within the
but
borders of the Chickasaw Nation, actually.
yeah, I was going to follow up. Oh, but you were talking about being able to predict fault or failure, or compensate or avoid fault or failure based on the feedback of your nodes. And that to me immediately goes to the quality of your nodes, because if you're getting good feedback, you can potentially do that. If you're getting bad feedback, it can be really hard to do that,
Well,
or
and it
impossible to do
can,
that.
and when we start talking about like the accuracy of a sensor, uh, or the integrity of maybe even the integrity. No, not necessarily. But when we start talking about the accuracy of the sensor, um, and we're talking inaccuracy, we're supposing that the sensor is actually going to report what it senses. Okay, like accurately.
Yes.
If you tell it,
Right.
I need you to do this thing, and when you see something, report, and then we assume that it's going to. Um, and I'm not sure that a lot of, I don't know if it's a manifestation of consciousness, and so human civilizations or what, but there are bad actors, not just bad sensors or bad bad sensors. They're one of the problems with the human civilization, the network of human civilization, is the bad actors.
Right.
A node which is going to report a thing which it believes to be false. Now, and that's a different thing than something that a node that is reporting a thing which is inaccurate. It believes it to be true, it's just not right. It's
Right.
either, it can be blatantly wrong, it can just be the resolution be wrong, it can pick up extra things or whatever. And I think a network would be in a better position to work around that phenomenon because of things like what you were saying about looking at the motor position. If you didn't
Hmm.
have an encoder, and if you had an encoder, maybe you would have cause to doubt the accuracy of the encoder to realize the position of the motor. But you had other ways, other bits of data coming in that you could look at and determine, make an educated guess rather, of the position of that thing. And so, likewise, I think with human beings that are acting in good faith but wrong or not, it, maybe toward a goal that is not necessarily um, parallel with all of the goals of other nodes. Uh, Maybe even that. It can be wrong, but still not deliberately passing false signal. It can also sense a thing and just not send a signal, and that can cause other problems. But that's not the
Yeah.
same thing as a false report, as a deliberate false report, because that starts to erode. I don't know.
Yeah,
I
well,
keep
okay. So one of the big differences is a deliberate false report can be crafted to look completely legitimate and look like it's supported by other reports and other sensors and things like that. Whereas generally, a unintentionally wrong report will be you'll be able to look at the other sensors and say that can't be right.
right.
That there must be something wrong.
And you'll be able to do it with a deliberately false report too, if you get enough
Sometimes.
data and enough time.
Right. And if you well, here's the problem. You need to have enough data that you trust
Right,
to be
right.
accurate.
And that is probably one of the big problems of a bad actor in the mix, is because suddenly at some point it bites you. I trusted this
Right.
node. This node has not just been inaccurate, but it's been inaccurate in ways which only make sense if it's doing it on purpose to ruin me or ruin
Yeah.
this group or ruin the ability of the network. And at that point, that's going to stir up a lot of mistrust, because that's like getting the carpet yanked out from under you. That's you know
Yeah.
that's that's not tragedy. That is deliberate betrayal. And that really makes that instability doesn't just affect the node that he lied to. If you've got a node that's lying and another node.
Hold on just a moment.
Oh, okay.
What? No, I haven't. Ben. No, just a minute. Ben. I apparently forgot to put the trash out tonight. We shifted nights. I have to go take care of that.
Go do what you got to do, brother.
I'm not actually 100% sure. Megan just got home, so we started
Okay.
later than I planned on it. So I don't know how much longer I can go because
Okay.
I'm in our bedroom. But
Yeah, that's fine. Do what you got to do.
yeah, if we need
Cut
to,
it
we'll cut
short,
it
we'll
off.
cut it
And
short.
well, we can either cut it short or we can pick it up another day.
Yeah.
We don't have swim practice at all next week.
Well,
So
I'm going to be in Oklahoma,
that's true.
and my parents no longer, they built a house on
Right. On a ranch out in the
right,
country.
and their
Guessing
internet
they're-
is, I'm pretty sure, pigeons are faster.
Carrier
certainly
pigeons
be cheaper.
with SD cards.
Well, or
They did a test on that. They got there was actually a guy who did that with like SD cards or compact flash. I think when it was still the big thing out there.
will it
He-
still be
he sent-
cassette tape?
It
Station
was
wagon
he sent like 4 gig compact flash cards. He had a guy. He brought carrier pigeons into the office that he owned, like homing pigeons, and had the guy attach them to the legs and had him send them home at the end of the day. And it actually beat what internet would have been, because at the time at least, and Google does that too. Actually, Google for years, I don't know if they still do this. I bet you they do. They have a free data transfer service for universities where they literally just ship hard drives around because it's faster than sending terabytes of data across the network.
Huh.
I'm sure you of all people will be shocked to hear that me doing some physical things with my hands helped me think about this and formulate some ideas.
Okay.
But you were talking about the difference between a bad actor and a mistaken actor.
Right.
And in computer networking, we have that very issue, which is we know that it's potentially possible that a message can get garbled when it's being transmitted. for no intentional factor, just it can get garbled. And so we put these various checks at the ends that are mathematically related to the message. You can't get the message out of them, but they're mathematically related. You XOR every 2 bits or do various things. That's probably the most common, is XORing every byte or every 2 bytes together and get a value at the end. And anyone could run that. We call it a CRC, or cyclical redundancy check. Cyclical redundancy check, it's hard to say. And so when you get a message, you check the CRC, and if the CRC doesn't match what it should be, given what the message is, then you say, oh, I don't think I have the message that was sent.
Okay. That's
a message
clever.
A message that gets corrupted on the line, or unintentionally, some way,
right,
will have a bad CRC. Some message that's been intercepted and the guts of it have been changed, the CRC is not encryption. It's only a check for basic validity against encryption or against corruption. A bad actor can replace the message content and recalculate a proper CRC for that message so that it'll come through and look fine.
So again, a deeper problem.
Right.
Or I don't know. To me, it seems like a more catastrophic problem. Like the potential for catastrophe.
Right. Oh, yeah, the potential to be. You're basically looking at the potential to be fooled by a man in the middle into thinking that your data is secure, or someone else is sending you information that they aren't sending you, or you're sending information to someone else that they aren't getting.
Right.
So basically it's the accidental versus intentional. We should talk about biasing. Biasing happens in sensors all the time, and if you can identify that it's biased, you can correct the bias if it's constant. If the bias is constant, and we do this when we look at news or we listen to politicians, we listen to a politician and we say, well, this guy's a Democrat or this guy's a Republican, so he's probably going to have this worldview. So when he says things, we're going to take it. When he pushes that narrative, we're going to take it with a grain of salt, and we're going to try to back it up a little bit to figure out where the truth might really be. And this happens with real world sensors all the time. A voltage, you're looking at a voltage value when everything's at 0, the voltage value is reading 5. Oh, well, 5 is 0. And then you figure out from there that it's always plus 5. So, 0 is actually -5 and 10 is actually, +5 or whatever it is, Right. Or when you tear a scale, when you hit the tear button on the scale, all it's doing is saying, the value I'm at right now, that maps to 0.
Okay.
It's my bias.
Right.
It maps to 0. So again, a bias sensor, as long as you can identify that it's biased and it's consistently biased the same way, can still be useful. And normally that would fall under the category of unintentionally wrong, most likely. They believe they're right.
And I think that happens more often than in the human world. I think humans are more incorrect more often than dishonest. And I think it's easy to get distracted and assume the worst and that kind of thing. And there are bad actors.
I think we're more likely to see people not report things that they should be reporting because they conflict with what they believe or want to believe.
Well, and that's been throughout human history. I mean, like even the guy that first laid his eyes through a microscope onto chromosomes, onto the nucleus of a cell, and was looking at those. He drew what he saw, but he didn't draw chromosomes, and there they were, plain as day. He drew some scribbles there that were better than nothing at all, but there's not an X in the bunch or a Y in the bunch, and there they are, stark and easy to see. But it's not that he was. It's a perception thing. It's not that he was withholding information that he doubted, although that is perfectly legitimate. It can be inaccurate and still not a catastrophe. Because those decisions about each individual node in a network is each human is deciding what information to take in, what to do with that information, and what information to pass on. And even if and we all have biases built in, and some of them we don't recognize. So even if we're deliberately trying to operate in good faith, there are certain biases and preferences that can benefit the system over time, can benefit the system in short time. Well, it's like manners. You treat people with dignity and respect, and it makes it easier to deal with those people one-on-one. But when a new protocol is implemented that says all nodes must not break the manners rule in this regard anymore, it's against the rules, it's against the law, or whatever, and so begin to curb free speech. Well, in the way that the way that the protocol has curbed it, the way that the law has curbed it, has now utterly restricted those nodes' ability to handle any kind of nuance or anything else that's not expected. That's not utterly expected, and that's bad enough. It's also what's even worse, I think, is that in doing that, you are forcing those nodes to operate in bad faith. To operate under certain conditions, they will know I am passing information that I believe to be false. And that is twisted.
It's basically like telling a sensor, you can report anything but what's actually, well, no, we don't believe that can possibly happen, so therefore don't report that when it happens.
Or don't report it that way,
Right. Let's go back to the simpler case. It's like, I have a radar that's rotating, and it tells me, hey, I just jumped forward 20 or 30 locations, and we say, no, you can't have a discontinuous signal, so just pretend that you're continuous until you catch up or something, which we did more or less at one point. That hid a problem. That hid a real problem that was out there, and we could make things sort of work by doing it, but it hit a legitimate issue with the system that was a failure that needed to be fixed.
Yeah, I gotcha.
You see what I'm saying?
I was talking this same phenomenon over with we had a couple of years ago, I had a system out in the field that I was working on, had a fairly simple instrumentation, and the problem that was reported was it was a little flow meter, and the problem that was reported was it's trickling flow. And I said, well, okay, it's all plumbed in. There's an air actuated valve that like a ball valve that shuts the pipe off entirely. So is there a leak somewhere? Do you see anything running out on the ground? No. Do you see anything that looks wet? Nope. So is that valve closing? Nope. Okay, go to the very end of the line, the discharge end of that line. Nope, nothing coming out. Flow meter still sees it. Well, that's a stray signal. That was what I assumed, and that was sure enough, that was what I found. And it was low voltage enough that it was confusing the PLC. Something's chiming at me here. But anyway, there was an actual problem there, and it became manifest that way. Because their automation was always listening, regardless of where it was in its process. It was always listening to my flow meter. It wasn't only
Uh,
listening when it expected it. Now, we have over time changed our system just a little bit here and a little bit there and tweaked it here for this location and that location. And over time, you find little things that work well enough in one location that you think, it would probably work in these other some of these other locations as well. And so you tweak the system here and you tweak the system there, over a spectrum of locations, over many locations over time. And
mhm.
recently, like today, I was talking with a guy about some changes that we're fixing to implement in multiple locations. And one of the things that some of the other guys were wanting was an intermediary that would not repeat, that wouldn't allow stray signal to pass unless the automation was expecting it. And I was like, nope, we ain't doing that. And of course, they were like, well, but you see, this'll keep this from happening and keep them from. And I was like, no, we're not doing that. Well, but don't you remember that time a couple of years ago? And I said, yes. And there was a legitimate problem. Well, it wasn't causing us a problem. I was like, it wasn't causing one yet. But
Yeah.
when a thing isn't functioning properly and it becomes manifest and you are in the position to
Mhm.
notice that, why
Yeah.
turn off the ability to notice that? And I'm pretty sure I won. Well, I know I won the argument because I'm right. But they,
That doesn't always mean you get to win the argument
well,
these days.
it doesn't. And there may very well, in the fullness of time, some locations where that gets implemented, but absolutely none of those locations will be mine. I
All right.
mean,
Well, I'm gonna stop recording on my end
okay,
and then switch over to Discord on the phone,
okay,
and
that's
I'll head
fine.
downstairs. All right.
All right.
Got me now.
Yeah, yeah, I got you.
Okay. So yeah, no, you're totally right that there's times, as a software engineer, I'm going to tell you that there are plenty of times where I have been told, yeah, we know that's wrong, but fix it in software and we'll fix it in the next spin of the hardware. And as a software engineer, it's your job to basically do that most of the time. But
Right.
you can't let them forget that the problem is theirs. And then, because what happens is, I've talked to you about this before, with this radar system we had where we were having all kinds of, we were having 1 degree shifts that stayed constant. And when you're reaching out 50, 70 kilometers to tell someone where to go pick up, some people who came over the border illegally in a boat, and you're 1 degree off, that's a pretty significant distance, off.
Yeah.
You do the trigonometry, and this was happening, and we had all this code to try to compensate for it and mask it and hide it, and it wasn't until we started saying, no, we're not going to hide it, we're going to figure out what's going wrong,
And every time someone reports a new error, we're going to take more data. And then, eventually we figured out what was going wrong. We figured out that what we could rely, what signals we could rely on, what signals we couldn't rely on. And then, what exactly was happening in each case of every problem we had, what was happening. And then we did the best we could on the system we had. And then when we made our new system, we made sure those problems would not repeat. And I think that's where society gets into a problem. And that's because, first of all, there's so many signals. Used to
Oh my
be
God,
there
yes.
weren't that many. Used to be there were your neighbors, and there was the nightly news, and there were the newspapers. And they were pretty much where you got most of your information from. And maybe, your workplace and, your
Yeah,
school and
yeah.
church, right?
The
That's where you
few
got all your
limited
information from.
people that you met in daily life, and then
Right.
newspapers,
Right.
radio, and
And
TV.
right. And so you had just a relatively small number of sources. You could pay attention to what they were saying. And, we watched the nightly TV every single night at home in my house, the local news and then world news. And, we weren't always sitting in front of it, but it was always on. And you got this impression of, okay, they're reporting what's happening, and hey, they're giving me good information, and when they don't, they come back and tell me, and all this kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And now we're so connected. There's so many voices that in fact, I was just thinking about this. The people I don't know are my neighbors. I know like one or two houses full of people out of like 10 on my street.
Isn't that weird?
And I've been here 5 years.
No
And
kidding.
yeah. And and I would say the people we know best are not my next door neighbors. They live across the street because they've got a kid our age who plays with our kids.
Oh
And,
yeah,
you know, and they came over and said hello, and it's really weird. I've actually been thinking about this in terms of human tribalism, which is kind of off topic, but that humans are always going to create tribes and belong to tribes, and that there's just no avoiding that. They're going to join. We are basically wired to quickly associate ourselves with the people around us, whether at work or at
yes.
school or on sports teams,
And there's a
or
lot
in
of benefit.
neighborhoods.
There's a lot of utility
Right.
there.
Right. But it immediately gets us this idea of the us and the other. And even, like in every police department and government agency that has internal affairs, everyone in there hates internal affairs because internal affairs, they used to be us, but they're not us anymore because they're trying to get us.
Yeah.
And I had this thought that we not only need our tribes, especially our location-based tribes, because location-based tribes are generally not ideologically based tribes. They can be racially based, but they're not generally ideological. That not quite as true for cities or colleges or things like that. But in general, like when I go on a suburban neighborhood, you have an equal chance that your neighbor's a Democrat and Republican. Who knows, right? You go out rural, you're more likely to have Republicans. You go into cities, you're more likely to have Democrats. But let's say in general, though, you're going to have some mix.
Okay.
And so you need that local because you know them only because they live near you, and you know them as people because they live near you and you deal with them, and you can see, hey, that guy is crappy to his family, so I don't really care for what he thinks. Or, hey, these people are super sweet and nice. Every time we have a problem, they help us. I think they're dingbats because they voted for the other presidential candidate, but they're really nice people. So clearly, maybe I'm missing something, right? But
Right.
then we also need our what I'm calling meta tribes, our religious tribe, our national tribe, our I had another one and I can't think of it right now. But I mean, our ideological tribe, our political tribe, right? Our fellow ideologues who share similar opinions to us. We need those to but to see not just the people we see on a day-to-day basis as part of us, but a larger group as part of us, and including many people we don't know, are still us, right? And so
Well,
we have this much bigger tribe we belong to now,
well,
but we
and
also have this.
that
In,
that's interesting. Well, okay, so it it's not that I was avoiding classical liberals in the past, or ultra conservatives in the past, or even moderate left thinkers in the past, but I'm finding that my new ideological tribe tends to be classically liberal, anti-authoritarian, and I really don't care what they look like, what they smell like. They're just about any other thing they can say things that I find that I disagree with, or that I find even, I don't want to say distasteful, just like not. I really don't understand why that would be of importance to them.
uh-huh.
But like Dave Rubin and all of those guys, Jordan Peterson, who's a pretty conservative dude, Ben
Mm-hmm.
Shapiro, who is a very conservative libertarian, um, Dennis Prager, who is a very conservative dude, and then Jonathan Haidt and Steven Pinker and guys that are, and Brett Weinstein and Eric Weinstein and guys that are kind of all over the old traditional spectrum, that
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, yeah, that's my that's my peeps.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right. But I would argue that that's your meta tribe. And the important thing about having a meta tribe that is different from your, and that's the problem we have right now. The importance of having both a physical tribe, and it could be sports team, it could be work, it could be, though we know we tend to keep politics and stuff out of work, but it used to be our neighbors, right? The people who live near us.
Right.
Having a different meta tribe, or having a meta tribe and a local tribe, means that there are people in your meta tribe that do not belong in your local tribe, would never exist in your local tribe, but you associate with them. They're us, they belong to us for you, and they're all people. The people in your local neighborhood are clearly all people because you deal with them,
Face to
visibly, face
face.
to
Yeah.
face, regularly, right? And they probably don't all belong to your meta tribe. And
Right.
so now you've got this, you can now absorb, you can say, well, the people around me don't all belong to my meta tribe, but they're clearly us. And the people in my meta tribe aren't all around me and they don't agree with everything, all the people in my neighborhood, but they're also us. And so you start, and then, hey, I've got this country, and I bet you it's full of people like my neighbors and full of people like my meta tribe. And so it's all us. And then you get a little bit less of this us and them, or us and not us. Um, but now when we spend our lives online, and we're, and as I said, we're terrible about this. We've been in our neighborhood 5 years. I've had a fair number of conversations with the man who lives next to me, but barely have spoken to his wife. I've had a fair number of very short conversations with the people on my other side. It's the neighbors across the street. We know better. But, and we've had, a handful of conversations with several, but a few of them we've basically never talked to. And it's a shame, and it's our fault. But at the same time, like, nobody's outside, or people are always going somewhere,
Right.
or, and so we never get to make this local tribe of people we don't agree with. And in fact, my in-laws, when they moved into their house, the people across the street put up a presidential political sign for the opposite party, and they're like, oh well, of course, so that's what they're all about. And it's like, before they even met them as neighbors, and so that, like, basically tainted their whole association with them as neighbors. And they've talked to them some, but they've never really spent a lot of effort getting. They've tried recently to spend some more effort getting close, but now that's been 9 years that they've
Yeah.
been there, and so they know them, they've talked to them, but they're still like, it's still kind of like, are they going to be nice to us today, or are they going to ignore us today? Jonathan Haidt, I don't know if you saw that video of him talking about, what was it? I can't remember what he called it, but he was in a lecture hall at a college, I think it was Middlebury, and he asked everyone to close their eyes and raise their hand for party affiliation, for ideological affiliation, because he actually said the left, the right, centrist, liberalist, or centrist and libertarian. And at the end, he said, yeah, this is what I expected. There's about 10 times as many left associating people than conservatives. And then he said, and so the issue that's going to come up is that in this lecture hall, you need to hear the opposite side. Because if you can only prove your argument to your side, you haven't proven anything. Because if you, basically he was saying that he's like, we all do have confirmation biases, and can't remember what exactly he called it, but basically it was that if you haven't argued from both sides of the argument, then you have no idea if what you've decided is true, because you have nothing to base that on, because you've only looked at one side.
Right.
And that people are really bad at seeing data. He said, it doesn't matter if you're left, right. People are really bad at seeing data that contradicts their own worldview. It's very, very hard for them to see it, objectively. He's like, I don't care who you are. If it contradicts your worldview, it's going to be very, very hard for you to take that data in and properly process it. And so he said, the problem is in this auditorium, we have 100 people. So there's 100 or 150 people, whatever. And so there are a fair number of conservatives, and there's a fair number of centrists and libertarians in total. But in your classes that may be 10 or 15 people, there's a chance there's 0 to 2 of them. And so your class may have nobody who is ideologically different from you in it. And if they are, they might shut up. In fact, they will shut up. They don't feel comfortable talking, offering a dissenting opinion. And they said the thing that should terrify you is that the centrists and the libertarians side with the conservatives on that. They don't want to speak either. And only the people who speak in class all agree, basically. So even if you have conservatives in class, or have centrists or libertarians in class, they're not going to say anything. And so they're going to self-censor their signal. To bring this back to the networking thing, they're going to self-censor their signal so you stop receiving that signal. Now, I think we're at the point now where many people are waking up to this and saying, "Whoa, that doesn't make sense." And actually, you mentioned classical liberals, and I would actually say that I'm starting to associate my meta tribe as thoughtful people.
Yeah. Yes. Oh my God. Yes. Maybe it shouldn't be the intellectual dark web. Maybe it should just be the thoughtful dark web.
Accept that there are problems, and that they are complicated, and that we need to think through whether doing it this way or that way or whatever way is worth trying. Maybe we can look at it and say, I don't think that's going to work, or I don't know if that's going to work, but we can try it, but let's try it with our eyes open. We've talked about the paralysis of nuance, right? You see all the problems with every solution. Well, you never do anything. So you have to try things. And this is where it's so important that the sensors are good, that we can get good feedback on, does this really make a difference if we try this?
Or
does it
even to properly understand the resolution of the sensors that there are. I mean, I'm all for better sensors, better data, more data, but there's so many that are already in place. It's just a matter of getting it all together and looking at it. Patterns matter. Patterns emerge.
And that's where the intellectual dark web has some value.
Yeah,
is that you can start saying, okay, these are some sensors that, well, they're probably not always right, or always trying to do the best they can to be right, and especially to tell the truth as they can potentially see it, and not intentionally mislead or deceive.
Yeah.
You there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I don't think it's only the intellectual dark web who are doing some of that, but I think the intellectual
I
dark
agree.
web brings the intellectual, or the thoughtful dark web
Yes.
is they're bringing unique things to the table, and I'm trying to work that out in my head. What is it they're actually bringing to the table? It'll happen.
I guess
It'll occur to me in the middle of the night.
what I'm saying is that while there are many other people doing the same thing, the people who have been identified as part of the intellectual dark web have kind of been tested by other people and
Oh
have
yeah,
been
yes,
found
you're
to
absolutely
be
correct.
good sensors that are giving good information. And that's where the
Good high
value of,
resolution information. You know.
right, or good low resolution information. That's fine as long as you know it's always good.
Right,
If you
but
know
you get
someone,
well.
I,
Yeah, you're right.
I would say, like, for instance, um, someone like Joe Rogan probably is not producing high resolution information himself, but he is pointing us, granularly at other sensor data, or is, what I'm saying? Like, but he's
Yeah,
always
yeah.
trying to be truthful, to be, shed the light on things. He always acknowledges his own credulousness, his own biases.
Yep.
Like, I want to believe, I've seen him, I
He
really want to believe that. I have no idea if it's true, but I want to believe that. And,
he
which
is
is a huge
very
acknowledgement to say.
principled. He's a
Yes.
he's principled.
And I disagree with him on several of his stances,
Yeah, I do
but
too.
yeah.
But I like the hell out of Joe Rogan. I mean, and for that very reason, I feel like when he that that his positions that he has, even when I disagree with him, that he arrived there honestly, and that means
Yes.
a lot to me. That means a
Yes.
whole lot to me. Because
Right.
then
And
I
I can
can trust
understand.
I can trust what he says without agreeing with his choices. You know what I mean?
Right. And he can explain, or, through his speech and through his discussions, you can see how he got to his opinion, even if you don't agree. And you can see, oh, these are the data points, these are the experiences that led him to feel this way. Okay. Like, that's important to understand how, more or less, how a sensor came to its conclusion.
Yeah.
And so, and you can say, oh, well, he does this and had that and saw this and did this. And so that, was formative, and he believes this now. Okay.
Yeah.
I had different experiences. I don't think that's the correct lesson to take from this, but okay, I see how, if you went through those steps, you could believe this and be very honest in believing this.
Right. Right.
So,
And that's the thing, is the honest in believing this.
right.
It's again, I don't feel like I have to agree with, and I'm not singling Joe Rogan out. You appreciate, but
Yes.
I don't have to agree with somebody else's choices. I have to
Right.
know that the information that they're passing to me is sincere,
Right. Right.
because that just simplified what I have to do with that information so much.
Yes.
Joe Rogan, I have no reason to believe he doesn't act in good faith
Agreed.
at all. And
Agreed.
sometimes he's goofy, and sometimes seems like he might be trying real hard to not be aggravated about something, But
Uh-huh.
any of the little bits of Joe Rogan, aside, I feel like when he says something, that he is saying what he believes to be true. And so I can sort out what information is there, whether I agree with his decisions or interpretations or anything else. I can go, oh, well, I would come to a different conclusion maybe, but at least the information works.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. No, exactly. And I think the same thing's true of Dave Rubin.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I think the same
you
thing
know,
is true of a lot of those guys. A whole
Yep.
lot of those guys.
So what about? There's a category we haven't exactly spoken about,
Okay.
and it's one of those categories where I'm not sure which way I go on this, and I think there's certainly levels at which it might work and levels which is basically obviously bad actors that are calling out non-obviously bad actors.
You talking about like provocateurs,
Like
or what are you?
Sort of, yeah, like a Steven Crowder.
Oh, okay.
You know what I mean? So someone
Yeah.
who's clearly, 90% of the time when he's being a provocateur, he is like wearing a flashing neon sign saying, "I'm being a provocateur," not trying to play it straight, right? He's
Right.
basically advertising to everyone in the world, "I'm lying. I'm faking. I'm faking. I'm faking."
Well, and it may not even be a faking thing, so much
Or
as
yeah,
I am very blatantly biased in this direction.
right.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
Almost like a
And with the goal, many of his most notable, including his most current, brouhaha issues, have gone around him doing something like implanting someone in a group with,
beep beep.
spend the computer, right? You know, to point out how ridiculous the bad actors are that he opposes.
Right.
Or maybe maybe they're not even, in that case, maybe they're not bad actors, but ridiculous actors. Like the people sending out
Ridiculous
crazy
signal.
signals. Right. But doing it intentionally to provoke and to show how clearly ridiculous the signal is. But then he also does things where he sits down at the table and says, I believe in this, convince me otherwise, where he's actually honestly just having conversations.
Right.
But the use of this idea of basically intentionally, he's signaling this is false, or like this is not serious, kind of, or this is not. But at the same time, but he's doing it clearly to get a reaction to bring out, ridiculous signal. The other thing, and I remember you talked about this a long time ago, like way, way, way back when we first started talking. About the idea, not in our lives, but about these topics, about the idea of how much signal has to be put out to try to convince people that you are worth listening to, especially the further out your ideology goes in either direction. The
virtue signal.
Virtue signaling, or virtue signaling in general, but also just the disclaimers. Well, I know that I'm a cis white male, blah 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 blah, but I have opinion on this. And this idea there's only so much bandwidth to listen to these sensors, and if we have to load the whole sensor message up with "this is why I'm okay," maybe there's something wrong with our sensors.
Right. Real well. Yes. Absolutely. And you can look at it from a sensor problem, and if there is an oversensitivity issue, a sensor problem's a perception problem. And so you've got people who are easily offended, or who are like the what do they keep calling it, the victim Olympics or whatever.
Oppression Olympics.
Oh, there you go. Oppression Olympics. And so there's this intersectionality and a hierarchy, the value. It falls apart under any kind of scrutiny, as far as I can tell. It's never been, nobody's ever explained it to me in a way that it didn't crumble nearly instantly. But
it actually is,
I don't know how much of that is a perception thing, or how much of that is a genuinely a bad actor, or somebody functioning as a bad.
I'm not saying it's a bad actor. I'm saying you're wasting all your signal bandwidth to tell people
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
why they should listen to your signal. You know
Well,
what I'm saying?
if you have no, and that's not a dishonest censor. That's a censor that is useless.
Right. And in fact, that's what I'm saying. They're basically broadcasting their uselessness.
Yes,
They're
yes,
broadcasting the fact that I have nothing of value to
yeah.
get through. I can't say anything about you. This is actually, I've never thought about this. So when I read Asimov's robot novels, I always thought, hey, the three laws of robotics, great. And later on, I read a novel someone wrote in the universe, but it wasn't Asimov. And he, and I think in his preface or maybe his afterword, he commented on how he always assumed that Asimov was pointing out that these three laws are constantly in conflict with each other, and that um, you always have to like the robots always had to, balance them against each other. And he had this in his novel. He had this whole thing about how I'm the robots every once in a while would be like, I'm experiencing some significant second law stress right now, or conflict right now, or some significant first law conflict right now, because you can't, what is it? Do everything, obey everything a human says. Don't let a human come, or don't harm a human, and don't let a human come to harm through inaction. Those are the three
Right,
laws, I
right.
believe.
Yeah,
And many times when a human says they want to do something, it's also something that's potentially going to harm the human. And so, these three laws stresses. Well, intersectionality has, the more laws you add, the more stresses you have. Intersectionality has 1,000 law stresses, where
yeah,
it's
yeah.
starting to show. Rose McGowan got heckled by a trans man, a man who was trans.
Right, right.
Um, and she first tried to, oh yes, sister, and why are you're not speaking up? She was trying to speak up about her issues as a woman in the entertainment business and the things she'd had to go through in this book she wrote, Brave. I haven't read it. Um, and this person stood up and tried to hijack her stage and say, well, you're not talking about the issues that trans women have to face and the harassment that trans women get. And she tried to say, well, they're not actually the same. She was like, yeah, sister, I hear you. We're all harassed, blah blah blah. But then she came back and she's like, no, wait, it's not the same to be born a girl, be a girl your whole life, have all the issues, biological issues that women can have, that a trans woman can't have. You don't have a uterus, you don't have ovaries, you can't
Right.
have some of the issues that women have, that biological women have. Um, and I'm telling my story. This is not your story. And effectively, they ended up canceling the rest of her book tour after this. And effectively, there's starting to be some. There's actually a whole. I read this article about it. This whole group called it TERP, I believe, or TERF. It was like trans equality rejecting feminists or something like that. That there was a term the trans had for feminists who didn't want male to female trans women to try to equate themselves exactly with feminism,
Yeah.
because
Well,
they aren't exactly the same as
it's
feminists.
not, and I'm surprised that hasn't happened before.
It's
I mean,
starting. It's
you've
starting
got
to happen. It's starting. Those fray lines are starting to occur, and I think that's the more intersectionality dives into deeper levels of victimhood, or as Jordan Peterson says, everyone's a victim of something. And as you start splitting, diving in, oh, I'm a victim of this, and I'm a victim of this, and you divide it down, and now you're trying to figure out who's the penultimate and the ultimate victim, who has the most say
right.
in the victim Olympics, right? There's the stress between each of these victims. The different victim laws are at stress with each other, and they're in constant stress with each other, and you effectively have to allow yourself to be subjugated by someone else's victimhood and say, oh, theirs is more valid than mine, or you're going to start butting heads. And it's happening, but quietly.
Well, the well, I don't think like I don't worry that all of this bull crap that's slipping in on, crowding out free speech. I don't believe that that's going to bring about the end of Western civilization, because I don't think it'll last. I don't think it'll hold up long enough. But I think it can do significant damage and cause a ridiculous amount of suffering before it goes away, which I don't want to happen. So I'm all for Jordan Peterson fighting it, Owen Benjamin fighting it. I'm all for everybody fighting it. Ben Shapiro bringing all of his benness to bear. Stephen Crowder doing the same thing.
Ricky Gervais.
Of all people,
got into the thing. Yeah, I mean, comedians have been somewhat at the forefront of this. I've heard a lot of comedians who said, "Look, it's either all okay or it's not, and none of it's okay." You can't, you can't draw a line. Like, clearly, there's taste. Clearly there's like you don't make a joke of, you don't go to someone random's mom's funeral and make a joke about their dead mom who just died.
Right.
But Ricky Gervais is like, I made jokes about my mom at my funeral because I knew her all my life and it was appropriate. But he talked about, was it him? No, it was Bill Burr who talked about, I think, a comedian who made a joke within the year about an airplane crash, and some guy stood up in the audience and was like, my wife was on that airplane. And the guy made a horrible. He's like, basically, you have to double down at that point as a comedian on stage, or else you just need to leave. And the guy said, "Great, let's go dig her up, and we'll have a threesome."
Oh God.
And yeah, and I saw a thing with Bill Burr. He was at a club, and this guy, he talked about going to a strip club or something, and he pointed to the guy. It's like, you know what I'm talking about? And the guy's like, I'm blind. And he's like. And then he kind of played with that, and then he was like, "Oh, whoa, you're just screwing with me. Your friend, you just turned to look at your friend. You got to be better at this blind thing if you're going to pretend to be blind for a comedian." And he called him out on it. And then apparently it was a table full of blind people, and they, like, one of the guys raised his cane, and he was like, and he just went on with his like, okay, look. The guy he's like, what do I got to do to prove that I'm blind? You need my eye certificate? Like, he went on, he made fun of himself, but he didn't back down. He didn't say like, oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry for offending you. Like, no, he didn't back down, but he made fun of himself. He made fun of the situation and everything. But like, dude, you're right. You're blind. I see. Yes. Because the guy's like, the guy held up his cane. Like, you're all blind. Okay. Thank you for coming to listen to me, but it was pretty funny, but he basically talked. It was a completely different interview where he talked about how you can't back off in those situations, and if you offended someone with a joke, you can't say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I offended you. I didn't mean to," because clearly you told the joke that you knew was somewhat offensive,
right?
Because you wanted the laugh out of it. Because sometimes that unbelievably or seemingly super offensive joke is it's so uncomfortable that it's funny, kind of thing.
Yeah.
I can't believe he said that. It's hilarious.
Well, I think there's something else there at play, but I understand there's value. I spent the early '80s was very unkind to my family, my extended family, and so we spent rather a lot of my childhood at funerals. It's. So I'm, and everybody developed I say developed, refined a pretty robust sense of humor.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I understand the value, but I don't know that it's I don't think it's a. Let's get a shock just so we can feel something and feel a little relief. I don't think that's all there is to it.
No, I mean, yeah,
it's relief.
Guess,
now, it absolutely is relief. And it may not only be relief, but that's a big part of it.
I think there's part of it too, because I had a friend who died young who committed suicide, and when I was in college, and he was still in high school. And we were at the part of it is that disbelief, that shock, that and just this desire to remember the person as they were rather than the fact that they're dead.
Right.
I think, they stay alive a little bit. They stay alive when you remember the funny, stupid, ridiculous things they did, and
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and you remember those, and it's not, you can do offensive things, and stand-ups, comedians have to deal with that. The good ones live on the edge, but the people, I think, humor at a funeral it depends on the person, right? Sometimes you're not going to have any humor at the funeral because that person would have hated it.
Right.
But if you've got a person who was a lively, vibrant, funny person, and you're at the funeral and you're all dour, yeah, you can be sad and at the same time have happy memories of that person that you bring up and laugh about.
Yep.
Right.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah, it's turned dark. But I guess my point was that stand-up comedians tend to be the ones that I've seen that are going to defend funny things that are deemed horribly offensive and should be banned. They're going to say, but it was funny.
Well, and the kicker is, why aren't journalists? Because I can appreciate where a comedian is going to have a vested interest in freedom of speech.
Mm-hmm.
Why doesn't every journalist, alive, feel compelled in that same direction?
Mm-hmm.
Well, but from a different place, a different place of utility.
Right.
Why doesn't everybody?
In the Dankula case, the precedent was set that context doesn't matter. That should terrify a journalist.
Holy shit, yes. That should terrify everybody. Context doesn't matter, then you can't even talk about it. Not you can't make the joke, you can't talk about it.
Right. You can't, and you can't talk about it. You can't be an actor who plays a Nazi in a movie. You can't report on the video technically. It's one of those, context clearly does matter, because I don't think the judge would say context didn't matter if it was a news report or if it was a movie that was clearly fictional and the person was playing a Nazi in the movie. So context clearly matters, and I don't think but the judge, said context doesn't matter in this case. Like, you can't hide behind humor in this context. It's like, context does matter. It does. It has to. It has to matter. It's the whole. Is your perception more valid than my intent?
Context matters with what you're going to do with the information. With what an individual node is going to do with the information, but it shouldn't matter as far as the law is concerned. Context really shouldn't matter, because he ought to be free to be a hateful, sorry son of a bitch, just like a guy who likes to annoy his girlfriend. No,
I'm going to push back on that, because one of the examples someone gave of context mattering with a comedian was, a comedian joking, "Oh, I'm going to go." What it was, joking about something like that they wanted to stab their kid or something. It was clearly a stand-up, like, "Oh, I'm going to stab you," or something like that. Whereas if they were literally at their house and they had a knife and they were in front of their kid's face going, "I'm going to stab you," then the context matters to the law there.
Oh, you're talking about like threat of actual violence versus somebody's being
right.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, or again, an actor in a movie threatening to kill someone, where they're threatening direct violence. It's a movie. They don't actually mean it, but they're pretending really, really well to mean it. And everything in the context of the scene they're in looks like, yes, they are intending to perform violence, but we all know they're not, because it's a movie.
Right.
So in the case of the law, it still must matter. Context still must matter.
Well, I just meant that they ought to be able to, but you're right. Those outlying circumstance, I just meant it doesn't matter if it's funny. It doesn't matter if it was meant to be funny. meant to be funny for everybody, meant to get on
Right.
somebody's very last nerve. As long as it wasn't meant to actually threaten actual physical violence, then the context shouldn't matter as far as whether
True,
a
though.
thing should be legal.
Right.
A spoken thing. I don't.
Yeah. No, I think I agree in principle with that. I think that gets pretty messy in the real world.
Yeah, it does. I'm sure.
But I think we've Me Too'd this. We've gone way overboard. You know, this is effectively a Me Too offense for quote hate speech.
Yeah.
Oh, we can't tolerate. He's guilty because he said it. It's like, I mean, he said in the video, I thought of the most hateful, terrible thing I could make this adorable dog do.
Right.
And, because I thought that would be funny. And yeah, you can argue whether it's funny or not. I happen to think it's pretty funny. But like his intent was clearly to make a joke.
Yeah.
It was in poor taste. But his intent was very clear. He made his intent clear. And intent matters. And now, intent even matters in the law because they have different degrees of things. If I planned ahead to murder someone, that's different than if I accidentally murdered someone or murdered someone in the throes of passion. They're different. We gradiate by intent.
Yeah.
Not in everything. I didn't mean to speed, officer. Well, you were. There. That's a much smaller, issue.
Right.
But though obviously I didn't mean to speed because my speedometer is broken. Oh, okay. Well, let's check. I think my speedometer must be broken because I thought I was going the right speed, so I did not intend to speed. That might get you off, but I didn't mean to speed. I just was. Is not going to get you off.
No.
But
well, especially if you say I was, that won't get you off at all. That will definitely get you on.
Yeah. But you're right. Context really matters in how you interpret a censor.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the answer to a Crowder kind of censor. The context matters, right? Crowder is clearly in some contexts being serious and clearly in some contexts not being serious, or being ironically serious, dealing with serious issues in a humorous way. I don't know.
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
Now I want to break that down. Well, I don't want to do it.
I don't want to do it.
I'll be thinking about it tomorrow while I'm driving 600 miles.
600 miles.
Well, I mean, that's a choice you made.
Yeah, I know it.
Yeah, I know it.
I'd make it again.
Yep. It's a good long drive.
Yeah, it is.
How do your kids do in the car for that drive?
They play on their electronics until they run the batteries down. Then we listen to audiobooks. Actually, I listen to audiobooks anyway, and they start paying attention once their batteries are down.
Okay. So what are you listening to on this trip?
Honestly, I'm not sure. There's Joel has started listening to Ender's Game.
Oh, okay.
So we might be listening to it. I've got some other stuff, but I don't know how. I'm probably going to listen to the radio. Podcast.
You should listen to. Well, podcasts aren't a bad idea. You should listen to His Majesty's Dragon.
Well, I was looking.
I'm
yawning now. I'm sorry. I was looking for it the other day and I couldn't find. Where was I looking for it at? Let me look for Amazon. Is it on Audible?
I don't know.
Okay.
I assume it would be.
After you told me about it, I was looking for it the other day and I never did find it.
Yeah, Hoopla only has the last three. I mean, I assume it is, but they might even have the first. They might even have the omnibus. I think, actually, is the omnibus His Majesty's Dragon, and the first one is actually called. No, I think the first one's His Majesty's Dragon. There's an omnibus in His Majesty's Dragon.
Throne of Jade, Black
That's
Powder
the second
War.
one. There's an omnibus she has, but okay, yeah, Throne of Jade and Black. So she originally wrote the first 3 books together, took them to the publisher. The publisher said, "I love this, but it's 3 books, not one," and split it up.
Okay.
Which I agree. It was 3 books, not one.
But then
it was
she's got like Empire of Ivory and
Yep.
Victory of Eagles
Audiobooks,
and all
yeah.
this other stuff. Okay.
They have it. They have it on Audible audiobook.
Yeah, I'm seeing it right now.
Really, really good. Really good reader too. And your kids would like it if they pay attention to it. Excellent reader, and he has to read some French in some of them, and he does really well. So it's really, really, really excellent through Victory of Eagles. The next book, Tongue of Serpents, not so great. Actually, it's by far the worst book in the whole series, in my opinion. And that seems to be the general opinion. I mean, it gets 3.5 stars here. Everything else gets like 4.5 or 5. And then it takes a little while for it to really recover. Like, it's never as bad as that book again. In His Majesty's Service is a 3-novel of Temeraire omnibus edition. If you're doing ebook, I think they it's only the Kindle version.
Oh, okay.
So not the audio version. So the follow-ons after that are like the last one was Blood of Tyrants, which was really good, actually. It was like really, Blood of Tyrants was back to probably, first or fourth or fifth book level. But really, really fun.
I see. I'm looking at her. All her novels on Amazon, but it puts her Twitter handle on there, and I think, the problem. Now I'm getting feedback on my end to get her into echo. But the problem with looking up somebody on Twitter, especially before I'm familiar with their work, is they'll be in an ass hat, or they'll have some little opinion about something that just rubs me wrong, and I'll be like, what? I understand being scared of guns, but you ain't touching mine, my hackles raise.
Yeah. One thing here's something I want to talk to you about briefly before I think we should call it a night.
Okay.
I have noticed through probably Quillette's circle and just our conversations and watching various, Rubin reports and Rogan's and things like that, and Peterson lectures and whatnot, that I'm finding it much, much easier to stay dispassionately detached when someone just jumps down my throat on Facebook or in person or something about, me calling them out on some ridiculous comment they made, or me pointing out some flaw in their reasoning or something like that, and them just getting super aggressive. And it just happened to me the other day. Someone had posted. He posts a bunch. Young guy. He posts a bunch of social media stuff. Left progressive social media stuff, and he posted one earlier in the day that said, the same people, more or less lines of the same people who decided that black people were 3/5 of a person also decided that we should have guns. Maybe we should look at that again. And then later on, he posted this thing from the Electronic Freedom Foundation about how, the government's made this huge data overreach on, they're taking our data when it goes across the borders in the cloud, that they're just, grabbing it as they want.
Yeah.
And that this is a horrible, and I said, the Fourth Amendment, which bars unreasonable search and seizure, has a border exception to it. And so when your data crosses the border exception applies. And this is, an issue with causing, and so this is the amendment you want to protect you, but is this one we need to reconsider because 3/5, because of the 3/5 thing as well, or do we only reconsider the one you don't like? And he like jumped down my throat and wrote all this and blah blah blah, and and he got way like super aggressive, and I was like, it was kind of like I knew his playbook, that he was I knew kind of how he was probably going to play it, and so when he did it, it was like yep, okay, yep. And it didn't get me mad. It didn't get me incensed. It didn't get me riled up. And I just was like, whoa, calm down. I am not saying, any of those things. I am saying, this, and I was able to make a very, no name calling like he'd been doing, no other things like that. And then we ended up having a civil conversation. He avoided my first comment. He didn't make a comment about it. But then I wrote a much longer comment about how, when we have carve outs or when we modify this Bill of Rights where 9 out of 10 of them, most people agree are really good, really good amendments, maybe we should consider whether the 10th one was a good amendment too, and we just aren't seeing all the facets. And we should look at what's happened when we have made carve outs for things like the border exception.
Yeah.
Now, the border exception, interestingly, I did some research on this today. I knew it existed, but I didn't know where it came from. The border exception actually predates the Constitution. It was for taxes or titles and duties coming into, for customs. It was basically saying we're allowed to search your boats and your carts and stuff. And then it not so much got expanded, but its purpose got changed for public safety. And I said, and now we've got this thing where for public safety reasons, crossing a border means none of your constitutional protections, for search and seizure apply. And, this is a result.
Yeah.
And so we need to be careful about saying, oh, well, this, protection shouldn't apply in this case, or, we should get rid of this because we don't need it, when now you're really, upset about this. And the other thing I found out, which was a little bit, maybe it was kind of comforting, was politicians have been the same forever. The whole 3/5 thing was the Southerners wanted slaves to count as population when it came to representation, but didn't want them to count as wanted them to be property when it came to taxation.
Right.
The Northerners wanted them to count as people population when it came to taxation, but wanted them to count as property and not people when it came to population for representation.
Right.
So both sides wanted their cake and wanted to eat it too. And so 3/5 was truly the compromise to say, no, they always count as population. And for everything, for taxation and for representation. And, again, nobody's truly happy with this. The Northerners wanted them to count as a whole person for for taxation.
Yeah, right.
And so, and that was basically the compromise that was struck. And it was never, effectively the Southerners felt like they were property and not people at all, and the Northerners felt like they were probably people and not so much property. But it wasn't the people that,
problem.
right. So they, so I was like, you can't look at something like this in modern context and say, oh, that person was terrible and we shouldn't pay attention to what they say, and then not apply it to everything they said. You can't just, piecemeal pick and choose. You have to look at, well, they did a lot of other good things, like said, hey, we shouldn't be able to be searched with no warrant. We shouldn't be able to. And actually what they say is that the border exception is not actually, they said the border exception doesn't actually override the Fourth Amendment. It overrides the requirement for a warrant. Basically, that they think it's always reasonable to search at a border, that you don't need a warrant, effectively. So anyway, it was interesting, especially the fact that both sides were exactly like they are today. They want exactly the opposite things, and they want their cake and they want to eat it too. Like, well, okay, so things haven't changed that much.
No, they really will, and that's what we negotiate for,
Right. Well, right now that may be the thing that's changed. Is we don't negotiate anymore. It has to be all their way or all their way.
Well, and I'm really wanting to examine more about negotiate the way we negotiate. Um, that has been that's been taken away. It's been made grossly inefficient. Um, you know, uh,
Well, yeah.
and I'm not sure. I keep getting this echoey feedback, and I interrupt myself. But I'm not sure how we go about looking. What do we do to solve it? I guess. I mean, we can do big, broad, sweeping things that will
Right.
never happen to solve it. But
We need to understand. I think it's thoughtfulness, thoughtfulness, and truth telling are the really important factors here, because we need to understand that if any one group, if any one tribe gets its sole way,
right, yeah,
it can't be good for it won't be as good as it could be as if no one tribe gets their whole way and everyone gets part of their way and everyone doesn't like part of the solution. Now, this doesn't apply across the board to every possible situation, but for most situations, it applies. The idea that the issue we have is that the politics are so victory and win driven now, like so win driven, that they're no longer country driven. I think that's what they're no longer actually country driven. They're no longer driven about being for the country. We've lost the country meta tribe. Almost no one belongs to the country meta tribe anymore. And so they belong to their individual ideological tribe within the country.
yeah,
And so they're not trying to make things better for everyone in the country. They're trying to make things better for their tribe because they're not worried about the nation. And the whole thing of compromise is everyone should be somewhat unhappy.
yeah.
And that feels too much like letting your tribe lose. And at some point, I want to say at some point in the 80s, or maybe just post Nixon, our parties became much more about being against the other party than we were about being for the country in different ways. Not that they weren't against.
That may have stepped up and happened like after the end of the Cold War.
Oh, I think it happened before then, because so I read something, because David Frum, I don't know can't remember how to say his name. That was on Rubin last week or 2 weeks ago. I had some stark disagreements with things he said, but one of the things I agreed with was that during the Obama era, the Republicans were just reacting to what the Democrats saying and doing, and saying we're doing not that. And they oftentimes did not put plans forward. Like they would say, "Oh, we have a plan," but then you wouldn't see it forever. Now, sometimes they did. Like there were plans put forward for certain things that that they felt they had solutions for. But there were many things like the ACA, which I don't like. But part of the reason the ACA passed is the Republicans were like, this is so wrong. We're not going to do this. We're going to block this. Then we'll tell you what our solution is.
Yeah.
Like, wait, no, you need to give us an alternative so that this isn't the only game in town. And they had nothing.
Yeah.
Because it's a super complicated problem with not great answers. So, but I read something just today, or was it yesterday, and I don't remember what it was, but I felt it was right. I could be wrong, but I felt like, oh yeah, I made its case and it was right. That effectively the Democrats spent the 80s doing that to the Republicans. Effectively just being against what the Republicans were doing, not being for specific Democratic things. Because they went 12 years out of the White House. And so, and then actually at that, in the 90s, when the Republicans came to power with Contract for America, they actually had this plan that they were trying to follow. They had sold this is our contract. This is what we're going to do. This is what we stand for. And this is what we're going to try to do. Now, they didn't do it all. Maybe, all of it probably wasn't a great idea, but that's how they got themselves elected. They said, this is what we want to do. And that was the last time that I felt like the Republicans really were like, here's our plan. Here's a bunch of ideas that we have that we think are good for the country. What do you guys think? Oh, you like it? Okay, let's try to do it. And then it became, oh no, let's just go after the Democrats or, anti-Democrat. And I feel like, I'm sure there have been lulls and there have been some periods. As I said, I think the 90s, there was a little bit of a lull period where they weren't strictly anti-Democrat, but then the whole Clinton-Lewinsky thing happened, and then they became, they dropped the ball and
pretty
everything else.
strictly
Like,
anti-Democrat once. Bill, I was never a big Bill Clinton fan. I mean, like of him as going to be when he was running the first time.
Right. Wasn't Contract with America after his election?
Do what?
I could be wrong. Wasn't the Contract with America in '92?
And don't get me to line. I don't remember. I had family in Arkansas when he had been the governor there.
Yeah.
And who were Democratic. I mean, they were Democrats and traditionally, or at least some of them were. And those were the ones that I was talking to after he had been president for. He might have even been into his second term, and I was talking to him and said they made some complaint about the president, and I was like, well, you know what? He's an Arkansas Democrat. Why did you vote for him for president? And they said, well, we were trying like hell to get him out of Arkansas. Which,
Contract with America was '94.
Okay.
That was the first time in 40 years that the Republicans took back control of the House of Representatives. And it was because they said, here's what we're going to do. Here's what we stand for. Now, I think then when Lewinsky happened, they basically were like, screw that. Let's go after the president. We've got a scandal. Let's get rid of him. Yeah. And they kind of just threw away all that, here's what we stand for. Here's what we're going to do. But someone realized, hey, we need to put out what we're going to do and what we stand for so the American people can look at it and say, yeah, I like that better than what's going on now.
Yeah.
But they're not doing that now.
No. Well, there's no selling point for doing it now. I mean,
but there should be.
Yes, I agree. There should be.
Because the selling point for doing that now is we told you what we're going to do and we did it or we didn't do it.
Right.
And we had a plan. We have a plan. Here it is. And to some extent, Trump actually did that during the election. Now, I think half the time he made it up that moment.
Right.
Changed from stump speech to stump speech. It could be different. But then when he got elected, he started doing those things, or many of those things. Yeah. Not all of them. There's still some that he wants to do that he can't do, like the wall.
Yeah.
He's having trouble getting funding for. But he started doing those things. And in fact, I remember reading, it was a meme or something. It was like, or a headline from I can't remember where it was. I think it was a satire site, but it might not have been. It just read like a satire headline. It was like, Donald Trump shocks Democrats in first 100 days by actually doing what he said he was going to do.
Yeah.
And for about the first 100 days, I was like, I didn't like him. I didn't vote for him. I didn't vote for Hillary either. I voted third party. But I was like, you're making me like him because you're being idiots, and he's actually sticking to his word, whether you liked it or not. And you're, saying all these crazy things that turn out to be false the next day, and people are calling you on them. And you're making me root for him, and I don't want to root for him.
Right. I don't trust that he is not acting in his own interest. I hope that that enough of his interest coincide with enough of the rest of our interests. Right.
Right.
I don't know. I think there's probably more strategy to him than the left wants to admit.
Everything I'm hearing is that there really isn't. That he's winging it. Well, who was it? Someone posted on Shapiro's Twitter feed. Shapiro retweeted something from someone yesterday, I want to say.
Oh, Charlie Kirk asking him about if you could talk to a 25-year-old Trump.
No,
Oh.
no, it was about how it was like, just so everyone's just for those keeping track, it has now been 11 days since he tweeted this, and it was about how he was really happy with his legal team. He didn't want to replace any of his legal team, and today or yesterday he was replacing a member of his legal team. So it was like he really is just flying by the seat of his pants. It was someone else posted something. I don't remember when, who, or where it was, but I think it was Facebook. It was a Facebook meme, and I don't know if it's 100% accurate, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's close to accurate. Which was basically that if he had taken his father's investment and just put it in the S&P 500, he would have like 5 times the money he does now.
Huh.
After all of his investments in real estate
After
and
all of
everything
it.
and all his businesses.
Yeah.
Literally just putting the money in the S&P 500 index fund and letting it ride, he'd be like a multi-billionaire rather than like right around $1 billion or whatever he's at.
Still, I'm not going to shout the guy down. Not for that. I'll shout him down for over other stuff, I'm sure.
I mean, failing to try to do something and make something is not a bad thing.
Right.
Right.
But when you then sell yourself as a genius financial person whose wealth is a sign of his intelligence, then I think that's a fair argument.
Yeah. Yep.
All right. Well, I better get to bed. We got a swim meet in the morning. Have to get up.
I've got an all-day
You got to get on the road tomorrow.
Yeah, and I haven't loaded the truck yet. Anyway.
All right.
Well,
Good talking.
good luck on you. Yeah, it was good talking to you, man. I apologize for not being more animated this evening.
You were fairly animated. That's
Well,
fine.
occasionally.
I'm sorry for being so late.
Well, again, it ordinarily wouldn't have been I'd have been better rested than I just happened to be today.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, dude. Good luck on the swim team.
All right. Thanks. I'm not getting wet, so.
Well, good luck on the.
I'll tell my kids.
Yeah, there you
I'll tell
go.
my boys. All right.
All right,
Bye.
man.
All right, man.